Tonight are the Academy Awards, so today I'm going to stop and rank all 10 Best Picture nominees from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all 10 Best Picture nominees. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. With that said, let's get started. Coming in last place, Licorice Pizza. I don't know if anyone else has drawn this comparison, but it felt a bit to me like P.T. Anderson's Rushmore, with this entrepreneurial high schooler that's into performances as well as an older woman, only through the eyes of P.T. Anderson. The acting is on point. The cinematography wonderfully captures the 70s and makes it feel like you're watching a movie that was actually shot in the 70s. The characters are complex and have well thought out characterizations, and they're put in situations that make for interesting dynamics between each of them, and it tells a cute and sweet romantic story about a 25-year-old that slowly realizes that she's falling in love with a 15-year-old, which is a story I just can't get on board with at all on any level.
Do you really want to see my boobs?
Can I touch them?
I'll see you tomorrow.
And I kept watching, waiting to see where they were going with it, because depiction does not equal endorsement. I think you should be able to tell stories about things that are where people make bad choices, where people do wrong things. You can depict them and tell interesting stories, and that doesn't mean that you're endorsing that behavior. The problem with this movie is that it takes this relationship that it knows is inappropriate, and it keeps on depicting it as kind of cute and charming, and you get to the end of the film, and the big happy ending is that she runs back to him, says, I love you. In which case the movie's happy ending, like, it's not a tragedy. It's not a story about her growing up and realizing that she needs to move on from this. It's not a story about her realizing that she's so desperate from affirmation that she'll even seek it in toxic grown men or a child. No, it rewards her going back to her with the happy ending of they're together and they share a kiss. And that's just a story that I just can't get on board with. And there's moments that I found cute and charming. There's things about it that were fun. But at its core, I think it's a story that doesn't work, that endorses something that seems like the messaging of it seems very weird in light of where the movie ends. Stories are about people growing and changing, and the growth that she goes through is realizing, like, no, I do love him after all, and I should be with him, and I shouldn't run to grow up and do this politician stuff. No, I should go back to the high schooler, and there's so many problems with that story. It also seems like an example of Hollywood being in love with itself and loving stories about itself, in which case this is a movie about a child actor, and it's all, like, soaked in the culture of Hollywood in the 70s. So there's all these in-jokes about John Peters and references to a mayoral candidate. And it just feels like a movie designed for Hollywood itself, telling a story that is problematic at its very core. And if you describe the premise to any normal person in the suburbs, they're like, what is this movie about? It was nominated for Best Picture? What are you talking about? There's tons of talent in front of him behind the camera telling a story that is just bad to its core. Number 9, The Power of the Dog. Now, this is a movie I went into not really sure what to expect. Like, I'd seen the trailer, I'd heard the discussion about the many themes in the film, but I wasn't sure what the experience would be watching it from beginning to end. And once I'd watched it, I felt that it was the kind of movie that I could respect what it was going for. I can understand to an extent why it's a movie that really resonates with a lot of people, but for me, it didn't really connect with me at all. And it's a movie just kind of jam-packed with a bunch of these kind of deep themes and explorations of different type of characters, where you have, like, Benedict Cumberbatch is presented as this man who's incredibly intelligent but chooses to do a job that's all about just being able to do the grunt work that doesn't use his mind, and his brother, who's not particularly bright, loves sophisticated society. And there's all these interesting contrasts like that, some versions of expectations with the path that the characters are on. But I just don't tend to gravitate towards movies that are designed thematically rather than based off of plot and story. And when it came to the plot and story of this one, a lot of it kind of felt a little bit predictable to me as it started introducing plot beats of what was kind of going on with the kid. And you knew something bad was going to happen. And as soon as they introduced the carcass that the kid explores, I go, okay, I think I'm piecing together how this is going to play out, what's kind of happening here, and the mechanics of how it tied together and why it happened, when it happened. On a plot level, wasn't particularly satisfying for me. And so as someone that just doesn't resonate as well on movies with on just kind of thematic level, by the end of it, it rang hollow. I can respect why other people like it. I can see a lot of the talent that went into it, but a big chunk of it really just kind of came off pretentious to me, especially when you have Benedict Cumberbatch laying out in a field with a scarf that he's running over his body in slow-mo with amazing cinematography. That stuff just kind of comes off pretentious to me. So it's just not the kind of movie that resonates with me. Next up, Don't Look Up. And when it comes to the Best Picture nominees, this is the one that stands out as the one where I'm just scratching my head as to how did that get nominated? One of these is not like the others, and it's Don't Look Up. First off, it only has a 55% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's rotten. Half of critics went, that movie's not very good. And somehow it still got nominated for Best Picture. Beyond that, it's like a satire that is a comedy that's just typically not what gets nominated. But like, I watched the original trailer for it and I thought, that feels so on the nose and obvious with what you're doing that I don't think that looks very good. And so it was a movie I just wasn't even interested in, and only really watched it because it was nominated for Best Picture. And the reviews for it themselves didn't really make it seem that interesting, as I was like, people that are like, I agree with the movie's message, but this is just smug people talking down to everyone else. Finally watched it because I wanted to do this video. And essentially that's how I felt. It felt like a bunch of people that felt like they knew better than everyone else and were talking down to them. Did it make me laugh at certain points in time? Yes. Is some of the satire on point? Yes. Does some of it feel like kind of people that are out of touch that think they know everything but really are kind of living in a weird bubble of super rich people that all talk about the same things and share the same worldview? Yeah, it did also at the same time. And so it was the kind of movie that I feel like it was only nominated because a bunch of people that vote for the Academy just like the message for it. They like Leonardo DiCaprio, so they voted for it to support the message of it, not because it's actually one of the 10 best movies of the year. They just live in a bubble where it's like, yeah, that's exactly what it's like. This is amazing allegory for what's going on with the world right now. And so they propped it up based off of just liking the message, not based off the actual merits of the film itself. And in certain ways, it does what it's doing with a lot of flair. In other ways, it's bloated with its runtime. There's some subplots that just don't even need to be there about like Leonardo DiCaprio having an affair that just kind of is thrown in there. It doesn't really go anywhere. And so did it make me laugh a little bit? Yeah. Was there a little bit more entertainment value, a little few insights that I thought worked? Yeah. That's why it's not at the bottom. But overall, a movie that I can't believe was nominated for Best Picture and just feels like a bunch of smug, rich people looking down on everyone else. Number 6, Drive My Car. And of the Best Picture nominees, this is the one that I had the least knowledge of before I started watching it. I hadn't seen a trailer. I hadn't really read a plot synopsis. So all I knew is that it was a foreign film with subtitles that was 3 hours long and probably was about a car. And that was literally all I had going into it, watching it. And it's a movie that was frustrating for me because on the one hand, I thought it did some stuff I'd never really seen in a movie before. The way that it kind of blended together the work of the characters with the world that they were in, the actual plot that was happening with the characters themselves. There's some interesting exploration of grief and processing the choices we did and didn't make and when we didn't make them, especially as you move into the kind of final 30 minutes and you realize what's going on, what the character's been processing this whole time. And then at the same time, I felt like it was 90 minutes of movie stretch it out for 3 hours. There's 90 minutes of plot and just so much in there that that was just too much, that didn't need to be there. That you can tell the prologue with the wife in 30 minutes. You can have 30 minutes on this new job and the driver, and then 30 minutes on their journey and their quest and him taking up acting again. And you can put all the same ideas out there. And it just took so long, so long to say I didn't feel all that much. And so maybe that's my own impatience. Maybe that's to say that I like things that just move at a faster pace. But I just thought there was a lot of fluff in there that didn't need to be there. And when you're spending so much time on things that don't necessarily matter, it also makes it difficult to focus on what does matter. When there's so much on some of the plays, the dialogue, the run-throughs, rehearsals, and some of that doesn't really matter for what's taking place. You miss what does matter. And so I think a movie that would have been well served by cutting a bunch of scenes, tightening everything up, and literally trimming an hour off this movie, maybe even more. Number 6, Nightmare Alley. Now, this is a movie that I really wasn't feeling the first half of this film, but dug the second half a whole lot more, and feel like it's a movie that's about 30 minutes too long, and all of that 30 minutes is in the first hour, where it takes way too long setting things up and spending time at the original carnival. And so it kind of burned me out by the time the plot felt like it actually kicked in and things started in motion with what things were really about. And once that happened, it was a captivating tragedy as you watched this guy form this great skill set and have all these rules in place and just slowly compromise, slowly give in, slowly fail to learn the lessons. And as he goes down this path, you can see all the moments where he makes the wrong choice and you go, oh, that's not a good plan. Oh, wait. Oh, he took a sip of alcohol. Uh-oh. Wait, what's he doing now? And you just watch him fall down this tragic path, and as you kind of fall into the final moments, realize that it told us where this was headed all the way back at the beginning of the movie. So by the time it got to the end, I liked it way more than I did in the first half. Like during the first hour, I just felt like, man, where is this going? Why is it taking so long to get there? And as soon as that second half kicked in, as soon as they leave for the big city, it really drew me in with this character where you just saw his descent into absolute tragedy, despair, desperation, and absolute insanity with the final choice that he makes, that he doesn't even see what's happening to him, but the audience does. Or maybe to some level he realizes just how far that he's turned into that guy that he saw at the beginning. And so it really pulled it together for me. But man, I just wish that first hour was much tighter. In 5th place, Belfast. Now, this is another movie that I didn't know a whole lot about going into it. I just knew it was set in the 60s and it was in black and white and was semi-autobiographical. And that was about it. I hadn't seen a trailer. I didn't know the tone or anything like that. And it was an interesting experience because it just does a great job of taking you to a time and a place and telling its story from a clear perspective. That being essentially of the child. And as crazy and violent and dangerous as the world is, it still has like a childhood sense of innocence and fun to it. And because of that, it can go back and forth from very normal family activities to violence in the streets and chaos in it doesn't feel tonally just disjointed at the same time. It makes sense because it captures the perspective so well. And that's what is interesting about it, because that's so much of the human experience, that life goes on. Even in the crazy doesn't mean you don't have the fun times. And it gave us a picture of what this place was like for families at a very specific window in time. And, it didn't like blow me away. It wasn't the most moving or emotional. It's not a movie that I went, man, I want to rewatch that immediately. But it was a movie that I thought did its job well of letting me experience something experience a time and a place. And that's what it set out to do, and it did it well. In fourth place, West Side Story. Now, when they first announced this one, I was like, really? We're doing this again? Steven Spielberg wants to do another version of West Side Story, which itself is a version of Romeo and Juliet? Why are we doing this? And then the first trailers came out, and I thought, wow, those look really good. And I mean, they literally, like, the cinematography looks really cool with the way they visualized this. Like, maybe this will be pretty cool, but still went in without particularly high expectations because I'm not a musical guy, and it's a story that's just so familiar at this point in time. And I just thought it was like as good of a version of West Side Story as you can make. If you're telling this story with taking the source material and telling it in a classic way, it's not a reinvention of West Side Story, but it tells it with all the best of 21st century technology. It's about as good as you could possibly do in the year 2021 with the cinematography, the choreography, and everything about it was just such a top-notch production that made a story that, if you've graduated from high school, you've probably very familiar with the actual plot of West Side Story, Romeo and Juliet, and it still stings. It still carries weight. The songs are still memorable. In fact, I hadn't realized just how many of the songs from West Side Story that I actually did remember and know. And so it turned out to impress me quite a bit as someone that went in, and I am not the target audience. I was cynical going in, and it absolutely won me over. And I was like, that was just really good. They did a great job on that, which shouldn't surprise me since Steven Spielberg is my favorite director of all time. In third place, King Richard. Now, I just said that I went into West Side Story a little bit cynical and like, why are we doing this? By contrast to that, going into the fall of last year, I said that this was one of my most anticipated films of fall 2021. But with the way the universe played out, I didn't end up watching it until this morning that I'm shooting this video. It's the last of the 10 Best Picture nominees that I was able to watch, and it was just as good as I hoped it would be, and it delivered the experience that I was hoping for, the great performances, and just a really compelling story. And, Venus and Serena Williams are basically my age. I'm the same age as them, and so then kind of their rise to stardom in tennis is just kind of somewhat. That's the world of tennis that I've kind of known. Not that I follow tennis, but I've kind of always known their name. But I didn't really know their story. I certainly didn't know how their father played into it. And just watching this story that, while it is a sports movie, it's really a drama about a family and their father who has so many amazing things about him and so many blatantly obvious flaws that makes him a compelling character because they're just so apparent to anyone staring at him. You can see that's amazing what he's doing. He has such vision for his daughters, and he's so committed. And like, dude, what are you doing with these other choices? Why aren't you listening? Why are you being so stubborn? Please stop talking. What are you doing? And that's when you have like a great central character. And what the movie does so well is that it finds a way to keep putting conflict in front of them without just doing all of the super obvious things that you expect a movie like this to do. So you have a family where clearly the dad's putting a lot of focus on two daughters, and then one of them really in particular. And it doesn't just lean into like all of the other girls are just bitter and angry about this. And so he has to learn to pay attention to all of his daughters. And it doesn't, certainly has all sorts of racial components all throughout it. But it doesn't do just like the dumbest version of it that so many of these movies do, where they just go somewhere and there's a stereotype of the racist there. It doesn't do that. It does the smarter version of it that puts much more thought into it and has much more the nuance of real life, all while telling this amazing story of hard work, dedication, natural talent, a few people seeing the potential, believing in his crazy vision, going along with some of his weird antics. And so I really thought it delivered. Thing holding it back from those top two spots, there are just a few moments that felt a little bit like they were trying to capture a complex set of things with a single moment. So, I mean, you have King Richard getting beat up, and then he grabs a gun and he's going to go shoot and kill this guy, and then the guy gets killed in a drive-by, and it just feels like screenwriting trickery rather than an authentic, real moment. And so it just, when so much of it feels real, while of course, like, obviously it's based on a true story, but then you're trying to tell a real story in the format of a film. There's a few of those moments that just play like the sensationalized, romanticized version of it that's condensing complex things into a single scene rather than more organically. And so just a few hollow moments kind of held it back just a little bit. But in general, I thought it was great, and it was exactly what I hoped it would be. Our runner-up, Dune. Now, little point of reference, I hadn't previously read Dune or watched the David Lynch version of the film. I went in only having seen the first couple trailers that they put out, and then I tried to go in cold besides that. And I loved what Denis Villeneuve was able to do with this world. And that's what I loved really about it, was that it felt like he created this big, massive world that I went to, and then on all the technical levels of the visual effects, sound, music, score, production design, costumes, all of it was perfect. That you just felt like you went to another world through the storytelling, the way the exposition was communicated, and then the way that they actually captured it. Just did a phenomenal job. And it's also a movie that I was a little bit skeptical about it until they announced part 2. As soon as they finally officially greenlit part 2, I was like, all right, totally on board. Like, I had a little bit of hesitancy of like, because the movie, it's very much chapter 1. It's very much the setup. Like, let's set up the world, a bunch of conflicts, and then the credits roll. And as soon as they greenlit the second one, I was like, man, I can't wait to check that out, that we're actually going to get the complete version of this. But as a part 1, its job is to set up the world and get me invested in these characters, the mythology, help me understand the conflicts, and create an epic scope and scale. And that is exactly what I thought they did a fantastic job of doing. And so as someone that loves sci-fi, that somehow was missed out on the world of Dune prior to this, fell in love with it immediately. And really, I mean, I just thought that everything looked so good, was visualized so well, and very excited for part 2. But in first place, Coda. Now, this is another film where I had very limited knowledge about it going into it. I'd seen a 30-second TV spot for it, and so I knew the basic premise, kind of. And then I'd been asked to moderate the Austin press screening for it, but I was out of town when that happened, so I wasn't able to watch it. So I only watched the film for the first time about a month ago, and I just loved this film. I thought they just did a fantastic job with it. And what the movie did so well was take this family situation in a very specific cultural context that I can't relate to, I haven't experienced, I don't know anyone that's a child of a deaf adult or in the world of fishing, and just drew me in and made it so interesting to where even the parents that can be extraordinarily frustrating because of their poor decision making, but you kind of understand why they're so clueless and detached from everyone else, because they are detached because of the nature of their disability, and they don't have, there is a gap between them and others. And the story just creates a set of characters in situations that are fascinating. Of what if you were a child and you can hear and your parents can't? You'd be incredibly useful to your parents, and they wouldn't even understand the pressure they're putting on you. And what if you love singing and music, and that's something that your parents are unable to understand in the same way that you are? That's like, I'd never thought about that. And the movie just kind of opens your eyes to this experience that I never even thought about that before. What would that be like? And makes it compelling while being entertaining. And that's so much of what I appreciated about this film, is that it does have complex characters. It is a coming of age story, but it's also entertaining and uplifting, and ends on a note where it just makes you feel good. And as much as there's conflict in the family and drama and frustrations, you get to the end of it, and it's a story about a family that really loves and cares about each other. And even so much of the conflict between them is like, you know, the complex nature with the brother, who at first his reaction seems like so crazy and weird until he explains where he's coming from, and you realize, like, I'd never thought about what it would be like for him. And that's what movies like this are supposed to do, is open your eyes to different experiences in a way that draws you in, that builds bridges of understanding while entertaining. And it did it so well. And so this was a movie that wasn't on my radar. I wasn't paying attention, trailers or anything like that. Watched it kind of cold with very little knowledge, and just thought it did a great job of telling a compelling story about interesting characters while being entertaining, emotional, and uplifting. So it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, I've got more like it right over there. You can check out my 2020 reviews right there. Or if you're interested in some of my favorite movies of all time, check out that playlist right down there where I talk about a bunch of my favorite films of all time. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.